Welcome back to our next edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel, joined as always by my co-host Ben Anderson. We are also joined by our own CBB Reviews Bailee Tucker for another edition of CBB Rank previews. We are counting down the days to the start of the regular season in college basketball. We are going 100 to 1 on the site with one team preview every day. On today's podcast, we're going to talk teams 45 to 41 in the rankings, and we'll get started in just a sec. But before we do that, I just wanted to remind everybody, if you are listening and you are not subscribed yet, would really appreciate that. We are trying to get those numbers up by the start of the regular season. It costs nothing on your end, of course, and really helps us out. So thank you guys so much. Let's get started. So we have our 45th team ranked in CBB Rank. We have Iowa State, the Cyclones. Last year in a loaded Big 12, the Cyclones went 19-14, 9-9 in conference, and ended up getting into that tournament as a 9 seed. To my surprise, they got handled by Pitt in that tournament, but they just lost a lot of games really down the stretch. I feel like they had trouble scoring the rock. They had a lot of seniors. 5 of their top 6 contributors from last year are gone, but I feel like this is a theme for these 5 teams, actually. They bring in a star-studded freshman class, as well as a few mid-major transfers. So, Bailee, I'll start with you. Do you think this Iowa State team is ready to compete quite yet?
You know, the Big 12 is just such a competitive conference when it comes to basketball. And for the last couple years, we've really seen the Big 12 teams shine in postseason and regular season. Iowa State, I feel like, has kind of been on the fence with that. Like, sometimes we see them perform very well and sometimes we see them perform not so well. So they're a little inconsistent. I'd like to see them perform well this season. I just don't know if they have what it takes to be that top team or one of the top teams in the Big 12.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with what you just said there, Bailee. The key right here is the freshmen. I mean, Omaha Biliu and Milan Momslavich are the first and third highest recruits in school history. And that sort of shows that TJ Otzelberger's got something being built here in Ames. But I think it'll take a while. I think this is more of a transition year than anything else. Otzelberger overperformed in both of his 2 first years here at Iowa State, and I'm interested to see what it looks like in the future. But for now, I don't think Taman Lipsey and even like a guy like Jackson Pavletsky from Wofford is going to be able to compete in that 14-team league that is just such a grind, like Bailee mentioned. I see this as more of, that classic. I feel like I've said this for every Big 12 team that we've done so far, Dan, but this is a clear like 9th place finisher for me in the conference.
Well, yeah, and that kind of aligns with what we have as a site. We have them ranked 8th in the Big 12, so 1 spot higher. But I think this offense can definitely improve. I like Lipsey, the rising sophomore. He'll lead the way, and, it's really going to be about those young guys, whereas last year it was about the old guys. Momslavich, I'm sorry, Iowa State fans, if I'm not getting that name right, but him and Biliu are both really freshmen that have a lot of upside, and they're not going to be one and done. So that's the main point there, at least most likely. So I think this team is a year away, and we can see some sparks, especially on the offensive end. I just don't see this team replicating what they did last year on the defensive end. And also remember how much they kind of fell off down the stretch. So they're not really going into the season with a ton of momentum, and the Big 12 schedule is a grind, like both of you mentioned. So let's move on. We got number 44. We got the Clemson Tigers. This is a program that if I were to tell you that their head coach, Brad Brownell, has been there for 13 years at an ACC school, you would have probably expected a little bit more out of what Clemson has done over that period of time. They have a Sweet 16, but that's really all they have, just that one Sweet 16 appearance, a handful more tournament appearances. But they've just been consistently respectable and not bad, and maybe a little bit above average. Ben, does this strike you as anything different than your typical Clemson fringe tournament teams? They'll have their ups, they'll have their downs, but they'll be scary, but they'll also lose a couple of bad games.
I think this team is a step above what we normally see from Clemson teams. They do lose a couple of pieces, but other than that, I mean, Hunter Tyson, obviously a big loss, and then Brevin Galloway as well. But one thing about this team is that they're going to be able to score the rock, right? I'm not worried about them performing offensively. And that's not necessarily what you think of first when you think of Brad Brownell coach teams. But bringing in Joe Girard, I think, will be massive for this program. And having returners like PJ Hall and Chase Hunter round out the top edge of that scoring offense will make Clemson one of the more dangerous teams in the ACC, in my opinion. My question with this team is the depth, actually. They're very old at the top, right? All top 7 of their starting projected contributors are either juniors or seniors, but they have the starting 5, including Jake Heidbreder, who's a transfer from Air Force, and then along with Jack Clark, with the 3 people I mentioned before. And then they have Alex Hemingway and Ian Shefflin as a 6th and 7th man, but that doesn't really scream production to me off the bench. I think one of the 2 guys that are going to step up, they have to do so. Maybe Josh Beadle or RJ Godfrey. These are rising sophomores that could have the potential to pop outside of those 2 that I mentioned before. But if you're looking at the grind of an ACC schedule, which I think will be an improved conference this year based off of last year, I'm worried about what they're going to look like in late February and March. But I do think they're going to have a really good start to the season. I think they're going to blow teams out of the water with their offensive firepower, but they might fizzle at the end of the year, would be my prediction.
So I'm very excited to see what Joe Girard can do for this Clemson team. I'm currently in the process, spoiler alert, of writing an article on the ACC point guards and ranking them. So I've been looking a lot at Joe Girard lately, and he's a little inconsistent, but I feel like this Clemson team can really just take anything they can get at this point. They're not a bad team, but they're just not one that really stands out for me. I will say their center, PJ Hall, puts up some pretty great numbers. I'm really excited to see how he fares down below. And like we were saying earlier, it's an older team. Hopefully those older guys can show some veteran presence, some leadership, and really help get these younger guys, maybe in mid-season, postseason possibly, into a form where they can start contributing more and really start helping the team, and not just from a point on the bench just cheering them on, but actually getting in the game and putting up some numbers and doing some stuff on the court.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned PJ Hall, because he's really, I think, just so underrated as just the polish that he has as on the offensive end. Not the greatest defender in the world, but you have Hall, you have Girard, you have Hunter. That's 15.3, 16.4, 13.8 points per game. Offense won't be the issue with this Clemson team. I think they will struggle, just to add on top of that, to guard the athletic teams of the world, the Miamis, for example. I want to say, I was about to say the Florida States of the world, but that's not really where they are as a program anymore. But just teams that could beat them athletically, I feel like will exist. The big issue with Clemson is just you can't drop games when you're playing on the road on Tuesday night at Boston College, or you're playing the bottom teams of the conference, right? They dropped a few bad games last year. I think they dropped one to Louisville. That just can't happen. And that's what's going to hold back Clemson potentially. But they having a little more offense could potentially cause that not to happen. We'll see. Let's move on to the team that Bailee covers the most, the West Virginia Mountaineers. So I'll start with you, Bailee. I'll let you take us away here. Of course, there's obviously the negative attention surrounding the program in the way that Bob Huggins, his career ended, and then you promote Josh Eilert from within, a move that, you could correct me if I'm wrong, was probably going to be made, but the timing was probably off there, definitely off there. I'm not denying that this team has talent. It's just hard personally to see a vastly successful season out of that group, just all things considered, all the noise surrounding the program. But what do you think?
Yeah, coming from West Virginia and being a lifelong West Virginia fan, we were all very excited before Coach Huggins left with this transfer class that he had gotten. It was ranked amongst a lot of people the top transfer class in the country. So we were all like, yes, let's go. We have all these talented guys coming in. Let's make some noise in the Big 12 this year, because we lost a lot of guys too. We lost Eric Stevenson, who put in a lot of work for us. Trey Mitchell, at the time, we didn't know he was going to leave, but he ended up ultimately going to Kentucky, so that's a big loss. I think we only have 4 real returners on the team, and these 4 guys didn't really put up a whole lot of numbers. We also have Jose Perez, but he had some waiver issues, didn't get in any games last season, so it'll be a little tricky to see how he adjusts now playing for us after not touching the court for a full season. But I'm really anxious to see what Coach Eiler does. He's a cool guy. He's a good guy. Very professional, the players love him. I've always heard a lot of the players say, like, Coach Eiler, like, he's just a guy, like, we really enjoy having him coaching us. And he did a press conference earlier this week where he said that he is just throwing out any previous offenses that WVU has done since he's been there, and we're doing all new stuff now. So I'm really anxious to see how that goes. I know from an offensive standpoint, West Virginia fans and maybe the general public has gotten frustrated because it's a little bit of a slow-moving offense. Coach Bob Huggins was more of a defensive coach, so he focused more on the defensive aspects of things. But Coach Eilert says that he's scrapping any prior offense, so I'm anxious to see what that offense under him is going to look like. I do agree it's a little troubling to think how far this team will go with all the noise surrounding it, but we still have a lot of really impressive guys coming in, like Jesse Edwards, Kirk Risa, Raekwon Battle. I know there's a little bit uncertainty with him as far as waiver goes, but I really think that this team, if they block out all that noise, I really think that they could have a successful season. So I'm anxious to see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I really agree with everything you just said. Dan, we've talked about this before last season, but I'm a huge Jesse Edwards fan. I think he brings a lot to the table in terms of what he can do for the Mountaineers. Raekwon Battle, I'm glad you mentioned the waiver issue. He is a 2-time transfer, so it'll be interesting to see what that looks like for him. But one of the things I'm a little bit concerned about with this Mountaineers team is the guard play. I think that Krisa in particular is prone to turnovers. You saw that a little bit at Arizona. He wasn't always the most reliable player, especially if you're looking at him as your one guard. But overall, I really think that Eiler has done a fantastic job keeping the team together. There was a lot of uncertainty around Bob Huggins firing. Krisa, I believe, re-entered the portal for a second before coming back to West Virginia, to Morgantown. But overall, I think it's a really solid starting 5. Like we've mentioned before, with a lot of these teams that are very transfer heavy, it'll be interesting to see what they look like in the beginning of the season. But if they're able to mesh well, I think they have a relatively high ceiling by the time they get to Big 12 play. I certainly would take them, in my opinion, over the Cyclones, who we just talked about before, in terms of the order of finish in the Big 12.
All right. Number 42, we have Missouri, which I'm going to talk about a little bit because Dennis Gates really lifted this program right away upon being hired. Went to the tournament as a 7 seed. They did win a game, and then they lost to that Cinderella Princeton team that made a big run. I think this could be a tournament team again. I don't think they necessarily have that star power of last year. You got Kobe Brown, Demoy Hodge, DeAndre Golston. All of them are gone. That's your 3 leading scorers right there. But it's an interesting roster, right? Because they did reload, and they have tons of veteran options as I feel like complementary pieces, just not the top tier all SEC talent they necessarily could have had last year. And that's why I see this as not an elite, but a high floor 10 seed kind of team. But I'm really excited about the direction of this program. They bring in a few intriguing freshmen this year. 2024 class is number 1 in the nation right now. So I think that's worth noting. I think really the direction of this program is solid, like I said, but it's your 10 seed with a high floor right now. That's my projection.
Yeah, I agree with that, Dan. I really like Dennis Gates, and I really like the projection of the program and where that's going, right? I don't think this team is going to be really that good. I just really struggle to see what is going to happen when you're down 6 by 4 points, right, on the road against Arkansas. Who's going to step up and be that number 1 option? It could be a different person every time, right? You could Caleb Grill on our site is projected as the 8th man on this team, right? It could be him. He's shown that at Iowa State at some point. He's not the most reliable player in the world, but he has that it factor sometimes, right? But if you're looking up and down the roster, there's no one that really sticks out to you that says, I like this person to be our number 1 option. Could it be Noah Carter? Maybe. Could it be Sean East? He had a lot of production when he was in JUCO, but it didn't really necessarily transfer over in his first year at the high major level. Could it be Grill? Maybe. It's hard to see what that looks like. We end up with a lot of 9-point per game scores, and if you're not Florida State, I feel like that's not really a solid recipe for success, especially in the SEC. I'm a little lower than 42 on this Missouri team, but I can definitely see where people are coming from with in terms of just the massive amount of depth they have on the squad.
Yeah, Ben, I definitely agree with you. I don't know how I feel about the number 42 ranking. I don't think this team is going to be awful, maybe not the worst team in the SEC, but just with the departure of Kobe Brown playing such a key role on that Missouri team last year, I'm not sure if any of the guys on this roster, like you said, none of them really stick out to you. I don't know if any of them can really fill that role that he was playing on the team. And I hope that somebody is able to, because Coach Gates has been able to really transform that program last year, and the momentum was up. I know they were selling more tickets than they ever had. So I'm really hoping that they don't lose all that momentum with this team, but it's kind of looking to me as if it's going to be more of a rebuilding year and just trying to get these new guys in here and be able to get them to a place where Missouri can become a competitive team once again.
All right. I think that's fair. I definitely see the downside there. I mean, like I said, I think it's a tournament team, but I think we could all agree that the future is very bright. And if they do lose a little bit of momentum, it'll be greater in the long term. But another program I feel like is similar in this sense is Oregon, and that is our 41st ranked team in our CBB rank. Dana Altman is coming off of a couple of underwhelming years, on the other hand. He finished with 20 wins in both of the last 2 seasons, but they were kind of stuck towards the middle of that Pac-12, and the middle of the Pac-12 is not really cutting it when it comes to getting tournament bids these days. The good news about this team is Altman brings in a few top-rated freshmen, and that's this class. So you have a really talented group coming in, and these guys will be really challenging the veterans for key roles. Talk to me a little bit about that, Bailee, then we'll head to you, Ben.
Yeah, I'm really anxious to see how these freshmen really compete with these guys that are currently projected starters for the Oregon Ducks. Like you were saying, middle of the Pac-12, not really cutting it for a tournament bid. The Pac-12 is definitely on the lower spectrum of basketball conferences. But I do really think that it'll be interesting to see how these guys go in and challenge these veterans on the team. I mean, Oregon really hasn't made a whole lot of noise with basketball in recent years, and I think it'll be interesting to see if these freshmen really rise to the challenge and get Oregon back on a pace to being a competitive basketball program. So I'm anxious to see what happens. I really don't know if this year will be the year for them, but I think the future is definitely bright with the top 3 or the top 33 recruits they brought in.
Yeah, and for me, I'm actually really high on this Oregon team. I think they have a lot of potential. Usually, I'm not the type of person to predict teams to really make that high level jump if they're bringing a lot of production that they had last year. But the infusion of talent, I think, is huge for them. I also think Cairo Oquendo coming in from Georgia is a really nice pickup that went sort of under the radar for Altman. I think this is the team that can get him back to sort of not necessarily the Final Four days, right, in the late 2010s, but I do think he has a lot of potential with this squad. I really like the depth in the backcourt or in the front court in particular with Kwame Evans and N'Faly Dante, and then you have a former 5-star Nate Biddle coming off the bench, and then like even Mookie Cook, a top 30 recruit there as well, and then in the front court players like Cuisinart and Barthélemy. I think there's a lot of talent there to go around. I think they're going to have a really good season. And in a improving Pac-12, not necessarily like you said, Bailee, at the top of the conference ranks, but I think this is going to be a really good team overall. And then if I have to place a bet on someone to have a good season, that is sort of under the radar, I think the Ducks might be high on my list.
Interesting. I like Dante a lot, the center. He's a matchup nightmare, and with Oregon's team, Matt wrote about this. He pretty much said the exact thing. Like, they're full of shot creators, and Dante will really benefit off of that. He's just going to really give the slower, less athletic centers a difficult time. Ben, let me ask you this question, a follow-up question here, because we have Oregon as the 5th-ranked team in the Pac-12. And the way I see it, the 4 teams which are in front of them in our rankings are pretty clearly in front of them. Do you see them as higher? Like, I guess we could spoil it a little bit in terms of what's to come in the future in our rankings, but just give me like what you see as your vision of the top of the Pac-12 approximately.
So I really like USC, and I like UCLA. I'm a big Mick Cronin fan. Okay, but I don't know if they're top 4 necessarily, but I think this is a year that the Pac-12 can get 5 and get 5 pretty comfortably. Like, I think that this is a very terrifying 8 seed to play against if you're a 1 seed coming in the round of 32. That's sort of where I'm at with Oregon. And for me, that speaks that they're a little bit higher than the 41st ranked team in the country. But I think it's another one of those teams that'll take a couple minutes to mesh, especially with the freshmen coming in. But again, they've been here for a whole this is their college experience. It's not like they're coming in from a different offense in a different school. I just think that the ceiling is there to where it's a very scary matchup for top teams.
No, I think that's absolutely fair. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Like, they win their 8-9 matchup. They have that definite mold of a team that could beat a 1 seed. Like,
almost, yeah, like Arkansas last year. You know how they beat Kansas?
Yeah.
Like, that's the type of team that I think Oregon can be this year.
And it would be nice to see the Pac-12 get back to being the best conference on the West Coast, because, like, I don't even know, that was arguably not the case, at least in terms of number of tournament bids. It was even with the Mountain West last year. Am I correct on that? Or did they get 4 and 3?
I think they got 4 last year, I think.
Yeah, because you're right. But either way, I think that will do it for today's edition of the CBB Review Studio Podcast. Once again, if you like this content, be sure to subscribe. We are cranking things up once the regular season starts on all 3 shows. So be sure to check that out. Once again, everyone, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and take care.